Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading from Kara, Shieldmaiden of Eire by J. Veloso Batista, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me for Chapter 1. All Hail the King of Dublin. Kara. Something's awry. Already committed to its course, the Nar slashed over the rapids, the empty boat riding high on the incoming tide, washing up the river Liffey. A thick pall of smoke clouded their view through the scrub and saplings on the southern shore. Glimpses of tall wooden palings poked above the fumes, a cloud of pigeons scattered from a sudden flash of flames, and incoherent shouts peppered a rhythmic clanging, as if some soul beat a signal upon an upturned pot. Hold the course. The captain lifted his hand to quiet his murmuring crew. Seems unnatural, Captain. The sailor next to Kara paused, his oar held dripping over the waters. Mayhap Dublin's afire. Easy. The captain pushed his pot-belly over the bow rail and squinted into the afternoon sun. Hold the course. Kara slid closer to the kaline on the bench. When the slaver offered to ferry them on his return to Dublin, Kaline had tried to dissuade her, not trusting the beefy, squint-eyed trader, but his price was good, less than the amount they were paid for the sale of the nag, which left them with a pocketful of hack silver. And while he sniffed at her ill-fitted leather armor and the long sword strapped to her back, he never questioned their motives once they showed their coin. The boat jostled into deeper water. Kara glanced at Kaline. Despite her push to run away, he had been her anchor these past few days and protective in his own way. He smiled at her and touched her vambrance, toying with the leather bindings. Swing her a port now into the Poddle. The mouth of the tributary river churned with the tidal wash. Kara heard oars scull and splatter. The ship rocked. Kaline placed a hand on her shoulder, and she offered him a wan smile. The ride over rough seas had left her with a heaving stomach, not much improved by the sour smell of the unwashed crew. Rounding on the promontory, the ship turned into chaos. A snarl of ships splashed and collided in the waterway before them. Vessels of all shapes and sizes jockeyed and banged, congesting the small bay. A sneck with oars beating the waters to froth crowded a slow-moving Nar overloaded with bales, and a clutch of shrieking women all roped together. Propelled by misaligned rowers, the snake turned toward them. By Nord's whiskers, the portly captain shook his fist. What are ye at? The wide-eyed sailors shouted back a jumble of cries. Hard a port, hard! The ship swung tight, the pilot heaving on his till, the deck tilting, starboard rowers lifting their paddles high to avoid the oncoming traffic. Oars clattered, the hull scraped. Ahoy, ye lee-born bastards! Poles jabbed and pushed aside the collision, curses flying from all sides. A swell sloshed water through their scuppers, washing across the deck. Tackle swung loose overhead. Kara ducked the ropes and grabbed Kaline. Pandemonium ruled the waterway. Half-raised sails sagged across midships or dragged loose in the bay. Shouting sailors struggled with ropes, poles, and paddles, a handful climbing rope ladders, men running along the wharf, others bent over the sloshing waves, struggling to pull wayward swimmers back ashore. Skiffs loaded with too many passengers pulled and rocked across the bay. Corackles bobbed and twisted in the bedlam, their unheeded pilots shouting at the larger ships plowing through their midst. Deep water swirled in a dark central pool. Kara tried to make sense of the commotion. A Norse longfort stretched the length of the left shore, a tall paling wall parallel to it, joining a wider fortress wall that seemed to ring an entire village. Crates and bales stacked haphazardly along its length. A quick glance across the black pool to the distant shore showed hints of a second fortress, two wooden steeples rising above its palisades. Grumbling, the captain guided his pilot to an open berth at the end of the long dock. The Nar smacked nose first into the wooden pilings, jostling the crew and shaking Kara from her seat. She stumbled to her feet. An obscuring wall of smoke rolled across the shoreline, smarting her eyes. Kaline coughed, steadying Kara with a hand on her back. The captain lurched out of the cloud and yanked a sailor by his collar. Tie us off. He shoved the man over the gunwale. Be quick, you bugger-brained bottom feeder, or I'll send you to Helheim myself. Ho! A shout barked out of the smoke. Kara could discern 3 figures jogging down the wharf to their boat. A throaty woman's voice. What are you about? We're told all, cast off. Listen, you beetle-brained codpiece. Flames are a-ragin' on Wine Tavern. Soon your leaky old boat will burn a well. Their thick accent confused her, but Kara grasped the intent. The captain growled at the insult and shouted back, I come to claim my stock. Is my right. Got orders for Eire girls and field thralls. He waved his hand in a useless attempt to clear the smoke from his face. Your right be worth nay if the Bragans afire your ship. What? Ye heard me. The wind shifted, blowing the smoke out of their faces to trail across the bay. 2 women armed with wooden clubs stood before them, the taller waving her cudgel overhead in a threatening manner. A lanky boy with a bucket hid behind them. Brega and Leinster joined to avenge the sack of St. Cian. Berith kicked a hornet's nest this time. Turncoats let him pass the gate. The taller guard gestured with her club at the sailor on the deck, indicating that he should climb back aboard, and the scrawny fellow turned his questioning face to his captain. Probably Dubgenty scum stirring the pot. The shorter warrior locked eyes with the captain as she spoke. Dubgenty, Kara had never heard this word before, but the fatter slaver understood. He huffed, his mouth worked as if he had a retort ready. Kara watched his shoulder slump, his head wobble. He dropped his eyes from the warrior's gaze, set his jaw, and huffed a long breath. Behind him she could see the ships had fallen into a semblance of an order as they rowed and pulled out of the black pool, laboring against the rush of the incoming boar. Brigands, eh? Thor's goats, a nasty lot. Think this skirmish lasts? Kara noted the captain avoided the blonde woman's eyes. The king's guards defend, numbers rally to our honor, but... The smaller woman wiped sweaty blonde hairs from her forehead and shrugged. These Irish be fightin' fiends. Best sail north to lend a shell, or drop sea anchors in the deep to wait it out. Aye, the captain grumbled under his breath and turned to his pilot, motioning for him to turn the boat away from the dock. Wait! Kara dragged Kaelin forward. We're not with them. Let us stay. Kaelin gave her a wide-eyed, pleading expression, which she chose to ignore. She leaned across the gunwale. We've come to fight. We'll join your guard. Pah! The shorter young woman rolled her eyes. Young'uns spoilin' for a tussle, eh? The leader measured Kara. Alnay turned on a fighter and ready in armor. Kara kicked her leg over the railing and jumped onto the dock. Standing a head taller, Kara gazed into the guard's pale blue eyes. The clear, calculating gaze reminded her of her mother. Kaelin lowered himself next to her. Know how to use that? The big woman pointed to the sword hilt over her shoulder. Kara nodded. We'd be proud to fight for King Ivar. Ivar, you mean Eimer? Her snort stifled a chuckle. The 2 women glanced at each other. Old Eimer been dead for near 5 years. King o' Dublinn is Berith, his son, so crowned since High Lord Findalinth captured Hildanth in the usurper. Kara could tell the big woman watched her closely for a reaction. Behind her she could hear the Nar push away from the quay, oars rattling in their sockets, thumping against the wooden planks. Well, Kara glanced at Kaelin. That would explain why he brought no aid to Guthrum at Ethandun. Ethandun? Heard it was a rout. She squinted at Kara. You fought at Ethandun? No, my father and brother. They were, she hung her head, lost. No matter, girl. We can use your Dublin genty sword and your brother. Kara started to correct her about Kaelin, but the blonde warrior pulled the bucket boy forward and, drawing a brush from the pail, smeared a blot of whitewash across her chest and did the same to Kaelin. Turn, she commanded, and marked their backs. Watch for these marks. Our guard knows you by this white, and you them as well. Kara turned back, expecting more instructions. His nose running from the smoke, Kalen sniffed loudly, and behind him the fleeing slaver's ship rode around the bend. Get on, girl, the bigger warrior pointed with her club. Show what you're made of. Kara squared her shoulders and marched down the long port, weaving between stacks of cabbages and piles of wood, tangles of rope and clumps of discarded sailcloth. Kalen trailing close at her heels. Kara could feel the warriors' eyes on her backs. Gulls squawked and hopped from their path. Parallel to protect the southern approach from the Longport, the paling wall intersected the fortress on an arm's breadth from the gate large enough for a wagon to pass. Drawn closed and barred from the outside, a small door allowed access through the gateway, only large enough for a single person to pass. A bull-necked man blocked the entrance, an iron helm with a thick nose guard fastened tight over his ears, and a battle axe in each hand. Fresh, the whitewash mark dribbled down his chest. Hey, we are here too. With a grunt, the guard stepped aside and gestured for them to step through the portal. Kara ducked and crossed into Dublinn. Narrow streets led in three directions. From the small gateway courtyard, the smoke of fires denser inside the fortress walls. The clanging metal continued to ring, muffled by the wattle and daub buildings leaning precariously over the roads. Cautious and unsure of which way to follow, Kara inched forward, her hands open at her sides. Kalen stepped beside her, put his finger in his chest paint, and held it high. Guess we have the permit, didn't even question us. Kara nodded. The streets seemed deserted. A cat slinked around the corner and disappeared. Have you heard this word, Dubgenti? Never, but that old slaver knew it, Kalen whispered. They called us Dubgenti. Ja. Kara crept forward, putting her hand across her mouth to inhale less smoky breath. Shouts and high-pitched screams sounded in the distance. Kara paused. She could hear the clatter of weapons. This way. Their chosen roadway rapidly tightened into an alley, barely wide enough for two to pass abreast. Kalen pulled his farmer's blade from his belt. Want your sword? Not yet. She crouched a little, reached back to touch his arms. These are tight quarters, hard to swing. Kara smiled at her companion. Kalen helped her escape Eddiesbury and the plans for her forced marriage, and she had learned more about him in a few days on the run together. He was 2 years older than her, tentative and gentle when he laced up her armor or helped her from the saddle. For the most part, they avoided personal conversations, a bit shy with each other despite sharing a horseback journey. She liked the way he watched her and tried to protect her, although she felt it was she who should be protecting him. Clearly a farmer's son, he had never held a sword in battle or even had consistent training. She remembered her father's words to her and her brothers when she had begun training in her 8th summer. He held up his fingers to count. Remember, for every 10 you face, 5 are farmers' lads, fresh from the field, handed a spear and told to fight. Disarmed, they will run. 3 will have training, but are easily defeated through skill. 1 will be crazed with Odin's battle lust. Avoid berserk attacks, for they are blind with the All-Father's passion. And 1, he held his finger in her face. That 1 is why we practice every day, for that is the real warrior who tests our mettle and calls the Valkyries from Asgard. Kalen weakly returned her smile, his eyes wide. His sword tip jittered as they advanced. He's nervous, she thought. Ja, a farmer's lad. Moving as quietly as possible, Kara led them deeper into the city. Planked walls and heavy shutters hemmed in the narrow way. They stepped over a foul-smelling trench and through a series of winding turns, pushed aside curtains of laundry, and entered a straight pathway. The air seemed to clear ahead. Kara swiveled to Kalen. He bit his bottom lip the way he did when he was worried about her. She read the concern on his face. I'll be careful.